You know, we live in a world where a new economy is on the rise around the very principle of sharing and developing new business models with previously unlikely partnerships. We've heard that can happen with cars, with data and innovative partnerships that can find new sources of income for cities to build infrastructure and revitalize neighborhoods. But our opportunities are even larger than that. Our next speaker, Lisa Gansky, is one of the top thinkers on this topic. She calls herself a market tech, and she has a perspective on investment that you will want to hear. Please welcome Lisa Gansky. Lisa?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. What a great place, Kansas, and this theater is amazing. So I want to jump right in and just say, beyond that it's a pleasure to be here and talk to all of you. Last century was the century of the generals. General Dynamics, General Motors, General Mills, General Electric. It was all about top-down, mass production, don't worry, we'll tell you what to do. Welcome to a different century. We're about creativity, the collective, community, disruption, instigating, sharing. So much of what we're going to be organized around, and we've already started to see this in many sectors all over the world, and especially in cities, is sharing. Sharing isn't new to us. We share infrastructure, transportation, good barbecue, things like public art and public parks, and restaurants, cafes, definitely pubs. And of course, all sharing starts and ends with what I refer to as the mother of all share platforms. So sharing isn't new to us. But what's new here is this. We're at a moment in time, last century was very organized around ownership. We're at a moment in time in which access to goods, services, and talent will triumph over the ownership of them. You might ask, as I did, why is this happening now? Well, and I know that you all are very familiar with this topic, but population is a big one. In 1900, 10% of the world lived in urban environments. Could have looked something like this. Recent forecasts have said that by mid-century, this century, 75% of the world's population, or equal to the number of people on the planet today, will live in cities. It may look something like this. In 2010, was the first time that in the world, more people were living in urban environments than they were in rural ones. So we are in a historic moment from that perspective. And then the second reason I think it's happening is, in 2008, the brakes came on massive spending, and suddenly, whether as individuals or businesses or cities, we had to realign the true cost of things with the true value. The third thing is that big brands, all the rage last century, well, many of them were caught with their hand in the cookie jar, being super greedy, some of them outright lying. And so as an entrepreneur, this is a terrific moment in time, because there's a crack in the armor. And before, where if you had a new idea, a new brand nobody heard of, a very small percentage of the population might be willing to give you a go. But now, all over the world and across all demographics, many people are far more willing to try something they never heard of from people that just arrived in the last couple of weeks. And so this is a really new and I think quite important phenomenon. And the last one is that this is a historic moment in this respect. We are more connected to more people on the planet today than ever before. Typically, unless you're standing next to them. But we are more connected, and for a big reason is social networks are certainly helping, but these little mobile devices that most of us have to have pried from our hands, that has a camera and a GPS or some technology to locate us on the planet, and web connection, is a big reason that friction is coming out of the business of sharing. Sharing is becoming more convenient, less costly, and more compelling in many instances than owning. So let's take some example, hotels. Hotels are something that we all have experience with. I'm sure, how many people here stayed in one last night? I know I did. We know that they're shared. The business model is built around sharing. It's not a new thing. It's not a surprise. We go into the room. There's a good reason most of us don't want to lay in the buff on the bedspread. It's shared. But if I asked you what's the fastest growing segment in the travel industry, this might surprise you. Any guesses? Private homes. Somebody said private homes. The biggest growing platform and more marketplace is this one, Airbnb. There are many others, VRBO, HomeAway, One Fine Stay, Love Home Swap. They have a variety of names, but essentially it's a marketplace, buyers and sellers. The sellers are people who own homes or rent homes and want to make part or all of their home available for someone who is a guest, either coming to the city or for some reason wanting to stay in a different place that night. These marketplaces are growing really rapidly, especially Airbnb. 200,000 listings in the last 5-ish years, 30,000 cities around the world. And between June of 2011 and July of 2012, they did a study with a third party, specifically looking at the city of San Francisco and looking at the contribution to the local economy that these marketplaces have. And $54 million was contributed to the city of San Francisco's economy through Airbnb, not meaning that that money went to the host, but rather that people spent that money while they were in the city. And 70% of the people who stayed during that time actually stayed outside of the commercial area where the hotels are. So people went native. And they went native by staying in residential areas, spending money in small residential businesses. So platforms like this are important for balancing out the distribution and the wealth that comes in and out of a city. One of the main tenets of the sharing economy is this: value unused is wasted. And so, meaning that our cars, our houses, our talent, our factories, our intellectual property, when they're sitting around not used, in that moment, they're waste. And there's a huge opportunity to create a very different kind of economy by tapping into that temporal value or waste and making something really magical happen. It's magical in a number of ways. This is an example of a company. So nature abhors a vacuum. And typically, if there's a vacuum, something will come and fill it. Well, in San Francisco, and not unlike many cities, the taxi service generally gets a C-, the formal taxi service. What happened with these mobile apps, we have the ability to connect to all sorts of waste and turn it into value. This is a company called Lyft. When you open up your mobile device, and there's one called Sidecar and a fancier version called Uber that many of you may be familiar with. But essentially, you open your app standing on a corner, and on average, 3 to 4 minutes, you get a little note saying such and such a person is going to come and collect you. And they show up, in this case, there with their logo of their very subtle pink mustache on the grill. And this is essentially a peer-to-peer, on-demand ride-sharing service that's really sweet, very responsive, and really relatively inexpensive. And the big danger here is that they're delighting far too many customers. The problem is that we are looking at this moment where we have one kind of economy hitting its like two fronts meeting. And what we're lacking is creativity around policy to create kind of an innovation or kids don't try this at home kind of space in which we can allow people to grow up and to learn how we should regulate or not these sorts of new businesses. And so we're seeing this both right now with Airbnb, like marketplaces, as well as these on-demand ride-sharing services, that it's time for entrepreneurs, cities, and regulators to become much more innovative about how we can maybe create these temporal or interim policies to allow us to learn more and to nurture these young businesses. But let's return to cities, because so much of what's happening is happening in cities. Recently, and certainly different from the last century, cities, as you all know, are becoming increasingly open, starting with data. There's applications like this one, See, Click, Fix, that lets me walk down a street, take a photo of a broken sidewalk or a traffic light that's not working, and it goes straight into the right department or person. It lets me know as a citizen it's being tracked. No one has to scream on the phone. It's much cheaper for the city to manage. In fact, this platform's now being extended to also address planning. So you can do pocket park here and other ideas and submit them through applications like this one. Also, as somebody mentioned earlier, we talked about civic crowdfunding, community funding, all these mechanisms. This is just an example of an oyster bar I'm particularly fond of in a small town in West Marin, just north of San Francisco. And basically, this guy is Canadian, if Paul hasn't left yet. And a great oyster farmer had a vision for doing this restaurant, but he didn't want to be beholden to investors or beg at banks. So he basically went to the community, pitched it, they all got behind him, and there's a line out the door since the day he opened. So there's a really interesting phenomenon in which people are curating not only what they want to see in their neighborhoods, but actively building partnerships with the community as entrepreneurs and artists. Another platform that I'll just advise you of, if you're not familiar of, Honest Buildings, is kind of like Yelp and LinkedIn for the built environment. So it shows you the buildings, what they're worth, who put what into it, who did the upgrade work, what their value is, all these sorts of things that allow us to really see and have much more transparency in and around the built environment. Meanwhile, cities, a word that I really stole from the UK, where they refer to their policies as meanwhile use, meaning like, meanwhile, while you're not doing that, let's do this. Some ways that we think about meanwhile spaces or uses is pop-ups. I'm a huge fan of pop-ups, not only because they convert waste to value, but trust and attention is scarce. And a lot of times, I think that the future of retail is going to lie a lot in pop-ups, simply because I know I'm not the only one with the attention span of a chipmunk. And there's so much stuff coming at us that if you know something's there for 3 days, it actually helps to focus your attention. Small Knot, also I think referred earlier, is kind of like Kickstarter for neighborhoods. It's specifically designed to support local businesses. And an experiment that's going on right now in San Francisco called Square Foot is a partnership with the city, in which the city is playing a role in kind of creating a scheduling model for some commercial spaces, allowing people to come in and out of them, almost like a co-working space. So early experiments. What gets measured gets managed. Sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. I just wanted to say, I think jobs are so last century. I know that we're all worried that we need to create jobs, that we're measuring jobs, and that we're panicked about jobs, but I think that we might be looking at the wrong metric. I know that Portland isn't necessarily a terrific example of the rest of the country, but I had some really specific incidents in Portland last week where nobody in a room with 60 and 20-year-olds asked across the board, you know, who has what job, and almost everybody looked at me like, do you mean what am I doing now? Do you mean what have I been doing? Do you mean what I'm working on? It's projects, not jobs. I think we were looking at a job and a career as a string of jobs, and I think there's something else is going on, and we probably need to start to flesh that out. And so don't have time to pursue that conversation, but in light of that, I think a big part of looking at jobs and looking at where the economy is going is to focus on and follow the talent. And amazing examples. Pony Ride is a $100,000 building purchased by a guy who owns a barbecue joint, 30,000 square foot building that was converted into a community space that's host to retail spaces, hacker spaces, all sorts of stuff. If I'm giving you these just as highlights because I don't really have time to go too far into them. Trade School started in Brooklyn a barter system for educating the community about, basically people really got to know their neighbors. That platform has scaled and is now as far away as Singapore. It's free, you can take it and use it in your community. Hacker spaces, these take all flavors and shapes. They're all over the world. Last count was about 1,200. It's just a physical space shared by people, in this case, with daycare. And for me as an entrepreneur, generosity is at the core of a lot of what we do, but I think that's true of any business really, or a lot of artists, makers, many people who do apprenticeships, who work in small communities or large networks. Generosity is something I think that we've maybe undervalued. GE Garages, one of the generals, is making it across into this century, voraciously trying a lot of experiments with communities around access and around sharing. This is GE Garages is essentially, they have factories, talent, and materials all over the world in communities. They're reaching out to those communities to engage them and learn what they need and how they can be more effective. It's very nascent, but stay tuned. And then, of course, makers. DIY started as kids that like to, break stuff and attach cameras to kites and make aerial photos or shoot potatoes through a tube. I mean, I almost lost my head coming over to have a look one day. And now the thing has grown up to be everything from amazing crafts and really top chefs to robotics. It's really this overall, almost tofu-like word that encapsulates and maybe inspires us who want to make things or get dirty, or some of, like me, who are good at breaking things, also a skill. And so this is just, these people are full of enthusiasm and also generosity. And then one thing that they did in the UK, which I found really extraordinary, and so I'll quickly share as well, is the big lunch. Basically in 2009, a bunch of people in the UK, like most of the population, said, the weather's terrible, the food's not so good, and I kind of hate my job. But what really sucks is I don't know my neighbors. And so they created this experiment the first year, the big lunch. Simple idea. On a particular day in the summer, come out of your house, put a table out in front that's bigger than what you need for your family, and invite your neighbors to have lunch with you. 1 million people came out and had lunch together. And it was extraordinary, simple and extraordinary. As a result, they do it every year. And this year, it coincided with the big Jubilee weekend for the Queen's birthday. Uh-oh, you missed a slide. Well, I'll just tell you. It coincided with the big Jubilee weekend, and 8.5 million people came out and had lunch together, which is just amazing, right? And they say that they had no idea that people are, a lot of this is people learning who's around them. Ah, where did that show up from? It's like magic around here. Okay, I'll give you a second. So listen, this is a lot of what's going on. This thing is people are experimenting, we're playing with the stuff around us. The truth is we have so many things that we as a global community have far more things than we actually use. So there's a huge opportunity to play and experiment. There's lots of mistakes being made. We don't think they're mistakes when we're doing them, they're just mistakes afterwards. We're learning together, we're playing together, we're making a lot of experiments. In my case, I'm inviting you to start to play. We're at the very beginning of something. Please blow things up, experiment, have at it. If you need help instigating, I'm always available, so just let me know. And one of my favorite sci-fi writers, William Gibson, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Thank you very much.